Hello and welcome to Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, where I discuss the future of this region blessed with hydrocarbon resources. As you may have observed, every week we give time to reflecting on topics relevant to the development of the Niger-Delta and her people. In this episode, nothing changes. We're here to focus once again on how to take the region to a more promising future. And be reminded the program is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC SPDC Total Energies Ajib Joint Venture, a Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, headquartered in Port Harcourt. Thanks for joining. I'm Adedayo Ibushakin. A topic for this edition of the podcast: Can young minds grasp public policy? Did you know that in some countries, young people under the age of 30 make up more than half the population? Yet, their voices are often underrepresented in public policy. Now, imagine the potential for change if these young minds were fully engaged and empowered to shape the policies that affect their lives. Now, public policy might seem like a complex and daunting field, but it's something that impacts all of us, especially the younger generation. From education, healthcare, to climate change, and social justice, the policies we create today will shape the world of tomorrow. In this episode, we'll explore why it's essential for young people to understand and engage with public policy. We'll break down the basics, share inspiring stories of youth led initiatives, and provide practical tips on how you can start making a difference in your community. Now, whether you're a student, a young professional, or simply curious about how you can influence the world around you, this episode is for you. Again, today the topic on Canvas is: Can young minds grasp public policy? And my guest is Ebenezer Wikina. Ebenezer Wikina is a World Economic Forum expert, an alumnus of the International Institute of Journalism, Abuja, the London School of Journalism, Harvard Kennedy School, and the Stanford Center for Professional Development. He is the founder of Policy Shapers, a civic startup that empowers young people with knowledge, skills, and tools to engage with public policy. Ebenezer Wikina, hi, welcome to Canvas and Niger-Delta Roundtable.
Thank you. Thank you for having me there.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And I don't say this lightly and no intent to flatter you either, but you are one of the really shining lights that we have in this region, truly inspiring, really.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for all the amazing work that you do with Canvas.
Oh, thank you too. Great. Let's get started then.
Sure.
Public policy. Now, I expect that a lot of those who are watching this edition of the podcast understand what public policy is.
Yeah.
But specifically, this conversation is public policy as it affects young persons.
Young people, yeah.
So for their benefit, I ask this question:
Sure.
What is public policy?
Yeah, sure. So policy generally can be in the private sector, in the public sector, several sectors. Organizations have policies, right? Policy, the word policy means a set of guidelines, a set of actions, a set of laws, even that would guide the way an institution, an organization wants to achieve something, right? So for public policy, the word public there means that it has to refer to the public. It's beyond just one organization, and that's where government comes in, right? And so public policy refers to a set of collection of laws, guidelines, steps, ideas that the government seeks to use as a machinery to address problems in society, to keep people in check, to save resources, because there are policies around like use of how we do wood logging, for example, and forests, and how people engage forests, and how people use land. So those things basically help to keep people in check, right, and ensure that we don't have people overusing resources, or we don't have people sort of like making life difficult for other people. So that's in a lay time what policy is. Yeah. Yeah.
Why is public policy so important, or why is it crucial, if it is important, that is? And how does it affect everyday life, if it does?
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes is by a German playwright. His name is Bertolt Brecht. And Bertolt Brecht says, I'm paraphrasing the quote, right? I'm sure the quote we put on screen, but the paraphrase of this quote is that the worst illiterate is the political illiterate, because he doesn't realize that the price of bread, the cost of rent, the price of transportation, whether it's keke, from here to there, every single thing is determined by politics. The value of our life, the quality of our lives, everything that we do is determined by politics and policy decisions that are being made. So when you realize that everything about you, like even the clothes we wear, the quality of it, the whether we can afford it or not, all of those things are because of the actions and inactions of governments, of organizations, corporations. When you realize that, then you know that you definitely have to be involved in it, right? But what we have is apathy, where people are like, I don't care about this. Oh, they are doing their election again, or oh, they are doing that thing again, and so it's now like their own thing, but they don't realize that that thing that is happening there determines their own life. So that's why it's very key that everyone sort of gets involved in it. Maybe not even from a place of like go and contest for a political position, but from a place of even just understanding what the process is like and what role you can play, basically, in shaping that particular process to ensure that your own life, I'm talking from a personal perspective, that your own life is not impacted badly or wrongly by political and policy decisions that are made. Yeah.
I remember when I called you
Yeah.
about recording this
Yeah.
episode of
Yeah.
podcast. I did share some thoughts with you.
Yeah.
And yes, no, I will not repeat the words
That you used.
that I used. But I find that when I engage young persons
Yeah. Yeah.
these days, I think, and to borrow a word you used earlier on, there's an apathy somewhat. Um, a lot of young people are concerned with a different kind of conversation, a different kind of things, social media and
The entertainment gossip and stuff like
entertainment
that.
and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and don't want to engage or do not engage in matters of how to do with public policy and things like that. Is it important for young people to get into that conversation, to be involved in public policy? Is it important at all? You know?
Yeah. So 65% of Nigeria's population is under 25. And so that's a huge, it means that more than half, just as you said at the beginning, more than half of Nigeria's population is in their 20s, right? Or early 30s. And, you can have more than half of this population just disconnected completely, from what is governing them, right? And so that for us became like, for me as an individual, became the motivating factor to start Policy Shapers, because we found that even in run up to the previous election, people were engaging from a place of sentiments. People were engaging the process from a place of, this is my guy, this is your guy, my tribe, your tribe, So it was more like a we versus them sort of thing. And no one was really asking the important questions around like, what really are you going to do for us? Like, what are the solutions you have? Beyond like manifestos that someone can write for you, like, can you tell me what you will do in 6 months and 8 months and 9 months, and how can I do something to like support you, So we couldn't really see any of those kind of conversations going on, and that was one of the things that led us to starting the organization. So young people don't. Everything. There was a time when in River, for example, in River State, a time when students were able to get bursary, and bursary will support them in university, and the people who were collecting money every month, and then at some point, all of that stops, right? So as a young person, maybe it's important to ask, why did that stop? Because bursary can help, especially now that things are really difficult. Bursary could have been really helping many students to go through school, whether it's like paying for all of those other extra things like school and everything, textbooks and food, etc. So maybe the question will be, why? What happened? Why did this stop? Or even issues around employment. Why do we have, especially in the Niger-Delta, why do we have the highest unemployment rate in the country, despite the fact that we are blessed with so many abundant resources? Who is asking the governors that? So it's in the basic questions. Even NYSC, for example, why have we continued to do NYSC for so long? And it does seem like the benefits and the cost seems to be matching itself. Do we have more benefits than costs? And how can we ensure that the program is more useful for young people? It's not just like a 1 year break in their lives, but it can actually help to launch them into something a lot more bigger. So these are just questions, right? But that's usually the basis for public policy. Because public policy has a cycle that begins with agenda setting. And so when you begin to ask these questions, you begin to discuss all of these issues, you begin to see, why does this affect me? How does this affect me? What can I do about it? Social media then becomes a platform. So being involved in social media is not really a bad thing, but it can be used as a tool that you can use to push these questions forward, to begin to ask and maybe like garner more interest. As we've seen, there are many movements that have begun from social media, whether it's NSAS, the famous ones, or many other ones, campaigns that we've worked on together at Policy Shapers. That social media has been like the engine for that kind of movements. But I would say there's a much more reason why we should be involved in public policy as young people than why we should not, because like everything affects us. Like I'll give you a very good example. So a couple of days ago, the Minister of Communications mentioned that there are tariffs that are going to be introduced soon by telecommunication companies, and that would mean that the cost of data will go up soon. Data now, as we know, it is not even very affordable, right? Because you buy and then in a few in a few weeks everything is gone. So young people being the most connected generation, especially this current generation, who are often on the internet all of the time, do not realize that if data does go up, it means that their accessibility to the internet will also be reduced, right? So we've started to introduce conversations around that to say, this guy is saying this, guys. Like, do you guys realize that this will affect data if you're taking online courses, whether you're just even online listening to gossip and whatever, all of this will affect you. This is how it affects you personally. And then that began to interest people. And they're like, oh, yeah, true. Yeah, tariffs. What's happening about that? And like, oh, let's engage the minister and let's see what he said. Because everything he said, none of it was it was all a private meeting. Nothing was made public. So people started to ask questions like, oh, share the documents. Let's let's see what you discuss with them. And how does it protect us, as a demographic. So, So I think everything does affect, it's a matter of perspective. How do you see it affecting you? And I think once people are more enlightened about how it affects them, I think the interest begins to peak as we've seen.
Speaking of social media,
Yeah.
and why young persons need to be involved in public policy,
Yeah.
why it's still the same question, but just expanding it somewhat. I mean, maybe the older people should just make better choices. So as a young person, I should just concern myself still with new ways to make spaghetti. Shooting videos on YouTube, or how to wake up on Flick. I know Gen Z's have these expressions. I don't know,
Yeah.
or I don't know, or makeup videos, or whatever it is to just get the likes on social media. So maybe I should. Why can't I just concern myself with that? And then the older people, maybe they should just make better choices, because these policies affect them also, don't they?
Well, are they making better choices? I mean, as as the country is today, it's obvious that there's so much so much more that can be done. There's so many economic challenges, social challenges that need to be solved. And we've had democracy since 1999. They still haven't been solved. So for me, I feel that's a pointer that, it needs much more than just to say the older generation. I think it needs an all hands on deck sort of approach. And whether or not we like it, you can make videos, you can talk about the things you love, the interests that you like, whether it's anime or whatever it is. But like, you still have to eat, right? You still need power, to charge your phone. You still need to be able to go to school and afford to pay tuition. So I think all of those things still, like, the issues do not go away.
But if I make nice videos that tell you 21 ways to make spaghetti, and I get enough likes and followers and all of that, and as they always say, make sure you click the like. What do they always say?
Subscribe on
subscribe
the description, the button. Maybe we should do that.
Maybe we should do that. And maybe, so if I get enough subscriptions and likes and followership, and then I get Elon Musk money at the end of every month.
I don't think Elon Musk money comes that fast,
or whenever it comes.
Yeah.
Or Zuckerberg money, or whoever is paying these days.
You'll be fine.
I'll be fine. So what does it matter?
You won't be fine, truly. You won't be, because now, I mean, there's even conversation now in government about taxing content creators and what that tax level should be. So like, I feel like in most ways, public policy is very invasive, right? Because it's going to affect you. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you work in the informal sector, the formal sector, you have an NGO, you have an organization, you have a business. Because it cuts across every sector, environment, health, everything. So like, one thing will affect you, And so how does that thing that affects you, how are you part of the conversation that shapes that thing that affects you? You don't need to be the commissioner, you don't need to, but how are you ensuring that you're rallying voices, people who care about that same thing, to influence decisions that affect you in that particular area?
You give the example of tariffs
Yes.
with telecoms, services a while ago. But what other policies are there? Examples, that
Mm,
is,
mm,
that the impact
mm,
has
mm,
great effect on
mm.
especially the young population.
I can give you a few examples from abroad. So the work I do currently across three organizations in three countries, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. I'll give two examples. One from India. So we have done some work in India supporting a young woman who noticed, I mean, this is based on her personal experience, that she found out that during her periods, she's usually very less productive. Like she's unproductive. Usually because periods, experiences differ from woman to woman. But for most women, they go through a lot of pain. It's a very tough time. You know, losing blood obviously means that there's less blood in your brain, etc.
Mm.
And so she started this campaign that tries to give 1 to 3 days of period leave. This is something that most like developed countries is a normal thing. I think in Ireland as well, it's already law that during period, women are able, if they feel like they need it, they can apply for period leave for 3 days, and they can be off for those days so that when they come back, they're more energized and they're able to like contribute to that organization. So she started the campaign on this, noticing that during her periods she's been very very unproductive, and long story short, with the campaign support that we gave to her, she's been able to now start law in her state in India called Odisha. And the Odisha government has passed law where women who go through their period can, in public and private institutions, can apply for period leave. So this is something, it sounds very basic, right?
Mm.
But it creates an avenue for young women, old women generally, right, to be able to access this particular legislation. But it wouldn't have happened if a young woman who experienced it didn't say, "What if we do something like this around this?" And eventually led to this solution. There's so many others. There's also an example in Kenya where so many young people in schools in Kenya, because of the cost of living and everything, similar to what we're experiencing here, are not able to afford like basics. Like they can, so if they can pay tuition, they can't afford feeding, or if they can, or they have to let go of something,
Mm.
right?
Something basic.
Something basic, which they need to basically help them go through school. And so a young man thought and said, "But the government has started this finance bill thing last year, and taxes are going to increase. So with more taxes, it means that even our current situation is going to worsen a lot more. So what can we do to sort of like make the government accountable and ensure that when we speak, they listen to us?" So all of the youth movements that you saw around the tax bill came from someone just saying, "Wait, hold up, why?" Why? And then everyone got angry. I started saying why as well. And so all the protests, all of the movements, everything that built around that, young men, young women getting involved, was because people asked why. And so the finance bill was stopped nationally in Kenya. They were able to make presidents not sign that bill, and now revisions are being made, and they're having like focus group discussions with young people on how they can improve that bill. In Nigeria as well,
Before
yeah,
you go to Nigeria, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and you can continue along
yeah,
that train of
sure,
thought,
sure, sure.
but is it possible that young persons uh, don't readily get involved in public policy conversations in Nigeria
Mm,
because youth involvement, maybe, I'm not saying
mm,
definitively, just maybe,
mm,
or maybe I need to rephrase that.
mm.
Does youth involvement in public policy conversation ever lead to significant changes, especially in the Niger-Delta or even in the Nigerian space for that matter?
My response to that would be that you don't know if you've not tried. Right? Because there's so many things that we say, oh, the government is not going to do that. Oh, this is not going to happen. Oh, I'm just going to waste my time. But you really don't know if you don't try. And we have some examples of young people, starting conversations and questioning certain policies and laws that had come up that had definitely gone down. I like to use NSAS as an example. And most people will often say, oh, the police force is still corrupt, in quotes, right? People always say that. Or, oh, security is still bad. So what really did we achieve with NSAS? Because that was purely driven by young people, young men, young women out there, asking for changes to the special anti-robbery squad, right? But if you don't take a step back and say, what would have been the alternative? If people didn't go out to protest and the special anti-robbery squad wasn't, stopped, what would have been the alternative? The alternative would be that more young people would be killed, the whole thing would have continued. People would be abducted in the night, bust into hotels and carry every young man that they find. All the things that we saw or that were happening then that got people angry and led to the process will continue to happen. So for me, for someone who works in the social justice space, that for me is progress. That for me shows the kind of effort and the kind of power that you can have if you actually do come out with a particular singular voice, and you can affect public policy in that particular light. So there's so many examples of ways where people have spoken up. I mean, there was one recently by the speaker of the National Assembly, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Sorry, who was who I can't remember exactly the thing he was raising. I think it was something related to the taxing of churches or something, was churches or mosque or something, and he came up on social media. And immediately, the speaker released a statement saying that he's taking it back because the uproar just on social media. It wasn't even. I don't think he even got into traditional media very, very fast. It was just on social media. The document came out, and everyone just clamped down on it, speaking really loudly, and that's how everything ended. So I think that sometimes we sort of like belittle how much power we have because of our lack of faith in the institutions. Which, trust me, I'm not saying that those issues are not there. Our institutions need to be more accountable. We need strong institutions that hold people to power, no matter who the person is. Whether you're the president or you're the governor, it doesn't really care. The institution should be holding everyone to account. I know we have those issues, but I think irrespective of those issues, if we say we should wait till we have perfect issues or perfect institutions, it would never happen. We would never have perfect institutions. I think it will get to the point where every institution begins to evolve over time as people begin to demand a higher level of accountability, a higher level of trust, higher level of integrity, as people continue to ask for that. So as we keep fighting for a better Nigeria gets better. I don't think Nigeria gets better first before we then begin to care. Before we begin to care about the country, I think it's us and our efforts that sort of leads to that particular point. So so there's so many examples, even from policy shapers as well. If you want me to share the examples of the work we've done at policy shapers, where
we'll get to that.
It's just been young people who are sort of led.
Yeah, I know you've been very busy.
Yeah,
we'll get to some of the things that you've been up to lately.
Sure.
But I won't be surprised if one or two young persons watching this podcast right now is thinking, so how can I get up to date? How can I become aware of current happenings and policy changes? Because for you to get involved in the space or the conversation, you have to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of young persons, I mean, no offense to them, no offense to you if you're watching, even know that there's such a thing called the news. to watch the news these days, to listen to the news
these days. Of course we watch the news, please. not you. I mean, I'm speaking for the young people now.
I mean, you are a newsmaker. You don't just watch and listen. You make the news. So, how can that young person be aware of what's happening, what's going on, current happenings, policy changes, so they can even get involved?
So there are two needs. So I think first there's need for platforms that do that, and that's what we're trying to do about policy shapers. And need for platforms that tell them the news in the language that they speak, right? That tell them this is what's happening. This is who cares about it. These are the people who are rallying on it. And I mean, this might be a soft launch, but that's something that we're building currently, and we're hoping that in a couple of months we'll be able to launch that platform, policyshapers.org, where you do have all of that's aggregated, all of the news aggregated together, but spoken in a language where people can understand, young people can understand. But I think much more than a platform, you need interests. And for me, I think my interest goes as far back as when I was really young. So from when I was like 2 years old, my parents would leave me with my grandmother because I was one of the first grandchildren that she had. So she would just be with me, for like months sometimes, and then she sent me back to my parents. But I think growing up, I remember that there was particular moments when my interest in like public affairs, current affairs began to peak, and that would be when maybe I'm watching the cartoons and it's like 8:00 news, and she just comes into the living room and she's like, "Put that off, change to NCA, get your dictionary, get your book, listen to the news and tell me what they said." And I was maybe like 5 or 6 or something, very young. But I think just that interest began to peak then. Just the interest to know about what's happening out there, just beyond what's happening in the house. How can I be informed about things? How can I know what are these words these people are using? And I think that interest began to build for me right from then. So I think even parents have like a a responsibility to ensure that that curiosity is built in kids. Schools need to ensure that we don't keep, because I feel every child is born curious. That's why they're touching things and breaking things and checking out everything. But how do we ensure that we keep that curiosity in people? Ensure that people are curious about information around them, curious about public policy, curious about healthcare, curious about everything around you, such that the interest to know is always there. Because if you don't have the interest to know, you can have all the beautiful platforms and nobody will really visit the platforms. We need to be able to ensure that we have that interest to know. And I think that there's so much motivation for us to want to know, because public policy affects our lives. That's enough motivation for me. The fact that I could wake up one morning and this house I live in will not be mine anymore, or I might not have power for the next 7 months if I don't get interested in whatever is going on. So all of those factors, I think, are enough motivation for us to be able to ensure that we are in the know. But I think that we also there's a role we have to play for the children of now to sort of like begin to build that particular interest. And for me, I mean, I'm thinking about it for my son already. Even though he's a baby now, I'm thinking of like what are the things that he can begin to think about? What are the things I can put in front of him that will pique that curiosity to make him want to know more, make him want to find out things, discover things, read things and stuff like that. So we talk about the reading culture a lot and how it's dwindled. I think it goes back to that as well. When last did someone read a newspaper? No, I'm not even talking about the physical one, even on your phone. Like when last did you scroll and check out the news and stuff like that? I think that's where we even begin from. When we begin to build that interest in young people, from really early on, I think it becomes easier to build citizens that care about things happening.
You mentioned language at the start of your response to that question. My last question.
Yes.
I mean, what language, Ebenezer? I mean,
No,
different from the English language.
no, English language, yes.
Or should the news be read or delivered
In Gen Z
that
language.
policy is lit, no cap?
Is work. It doesn't have to be in that particular like slang language. But I'm saying like breaking down, because sometimes some of the things in the government space has a lot of jargon. We say things like budget supplement or budget deficit, or certain things that people that might sound very technical to people who work in that field, but a random person might not really understand if they didn't go to school to do government or something. So I think just being able to explain things for that's extra paragraph of saying this is what this actually means and giving examples to it, I think is basically what I think the language needs to be. And news organizations are actually doing really well. I mean, there's some of them that are doing really well now. Getting on TikTok, trying to find ways to make these things fun and making sure that people know about things from a lot more lighter means. Because the whole thing with social media is not just in Nigeria. I think it's a global thing where social media has penetrated all our lives. And so that's where people get their first news on X or on Facebook. Something breaks there first. So how do you ensure that the platforms where people are, you're able to use those platforms to reach them and engage them further? Yeah.
But maybe also news should be delivered lit, no cap.
Maybe, who knows? Could be fun. Could be fun.
All right. It is Converse in Niger-Delta Roundtable brought to you by SPDC. We're discussing can young minds grasp public policy? My guest is Ebenezer Wikina. We'll go for a break. We'll return shortly. The podcast continues in a moment. Please stay with us.
Yellow and black markers indicate pipeline and flow line right-of-way boundaries. Your activity could impact on the buried high-pressure hydrocarbon pipelines and flow lines, leading to possible leaks and explosion. Please keep off. Do not engage in sand mining or any form of excavation, pipeline vandalism, oil theft, and bush burning within pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Do not farm, trade, or locate any business on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. It is against the law to apportion land, sell, or build on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Maintain a setback distance of at least 30 meters or about 100 feet from the right-of-way boundaries always. We care for your safety and that of the environment.
This message is brought to you by the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, SPDC, operator of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, Total Energies, and Ajib Joint Venture.
Welcome back. It is Converse in Niger-Delta Roundtable brought to you by SPDC. And can young minds grasp public policy? No cap. I don't even know if that was correct usage.
No cap, yeah. It means no lies.
Okay. It's all discussing right now. My guest is Ebenezer Wikina, founder
Policy shapers.
policy shapers. Ebenezer, you're welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Um, s- Everyone talks about skills these days.
Mhm.
Whatever had a conversation
Mm.
can be had without talking about skills, skills
Mm.
development. It's not so. Knowledge is not just enough any longer.
Mm.
What can you do?
Do with the
Application,
knowledge. Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
I was talking about understanding public policy or being able to engage in conversations about public policy. Are there any skill set that are essential for understanding and influencing public policy?
Yeah, there are several skills that I think young people need. Some of which already like gets built into us through school. When people actually do focus on doing what happens in school, like things like research, for example. You see a news story. Is it true? Is it fake? Some people just start sharing it. Do you take a second to probe further? Maybe like copy the link and put on Google search to see if it shows, on any other platform. So I think like things like research, basic instincts like being able to analyze information. If the government has said that maybe in 2023 budgets, we had some money allocated to cars, and that same money allocated to cars in 2024. And in 2025, it's also allocated to cars. Analysis will tell you that, that looks funny. Didn't we buy the cars in 2023? Why are we buying in 2024 and buying in 2025? So I think just those basic like instincts to be able to dissect information. I talked about reading because sometimes policy documents can be quite bulky. They do have executive summary, but sometimes there's many things are hidden within the fine print. So I think reading, being able to read, I think is a useful skill as well. Research, analysis, reading, studying. There's also need for some skills like being able to like express your ideas in a coherent manner. So what we've done over the past 2 years is that between 2020 and 2022, my team and I took part in policy hackathons at Harvard, MIT, Stanford, because they were conducting policy hackathons just after COVID to see ways to mainstream young people's thoughts into the U.S. government's policy decision framework and stuff like that. So we took part in those hackathons, and we've organized for the past 2 years policy hackathons for university students. Because we believe, okay, who is the basic literate person? It should be in university, right? It should be someone who's thinking, beyond just the secondary school level. And so we've had close to 600 university students pass through these policy hackathons. And we've taught them like basic things like research, how to build teams. If you want to like advocate for something, how do you start an advocacy, for example, from social media? How do you write a policy memo? What kind of research do you need? How do you even do footnotes? How do you, all those kind of basic things. And we've had some really good interest over the past couple of years from young people who are like, oh, okay, so I can actually write. Some people don't believe that they can write. So, okay, so it just putting the ideas down like this. This is what the summary is like. This is how a policy recommendation is framed. Oh, okay, and I can actually send this to a senator. I can actually it's not just me just writing for myself. I can actually use this out there or publish an opinion editorial about it or stuff like that. So we've been building those skills, and we've seen that, there's still so much more to do, obviously. 600 is out of how many million is a very small number. But I think that we're just piloting this now, and we're currently in talks with a couple of private universities for this year, where we'll be hosting something for all of the private universities in the country, and we hope we use that to build over for public universities as well after that. So, so there's so many skills that you can build.
Speaking of breaking things down,
Yeah.
what's a policy hackathon?
So a policy hackathon, thank you. So a policy hackathon is like a tech hackathon. It's a space where, so hackathon generally refers to a space for ideas, right? Where people can think, so there are problems, and you think out on solutions to that problem. What are all the possible solutions you can get to a particular problem? And you choose what you think is the best solution, and you put that down. So if it's a tech hackathon, maybe you build an app or a website or something. Or if it's, in our case, a policy hackathon, you write a policy memo. A quick 2-pager that explains what is the problem, this is why the problem is very key, and this is why I think we should solve it now. And you explain that quickly using charts, graphs, etc. to be able to do that. So that's what the policy hackathon is.
Great. Earlier on as well, you talked about understanding policy. You talked about reading between the lines, seeing the fine print.
Yeah.
You talked about instincts. Also, you have to be able to communicate. So,
Yes.
with all of this, I imagine that critical thinking and effective communication are key.
Very key, yeah.
To understanding policy and engaging in conversations about policy,
Yes,
or even
yes.
formulating some yourself.
Key, yes.
So how can a young person or young persons develop critical thinking and effective communication skills?
I think with communication, it comes from communicating, right? It comes from learning. I mean, there are resources out there, a lot of resources out there that help you to understand how to speak to people. There are many public speaking books out there, right? There are courses and seminars people do all of the time, right? I think it's just like taking a conscious effort and taking a conscious step to want to build skills in this particular area. Some people come naturally gifted in certain things, like that. I'm sure that is naturally gifted in being able to communicate and
Oh,
speak so
you
well.
flatter me.
But I'm sure you also did take some courses, right? You thought about, okay, how can I build skills in this particular area and this particular area?
No, I've been doing it since I was in my mother's womb.
So like he didn't just fall from the sky, right? So I think just being able to build consciously wanting to build skills in this area is one of the things, and that's why I actually do think that our the content for our schools need to improve way for that. I think that we've been teaching the same thing for almost 30 years. I feel like we need to expand beyond that to start. So people should be able to learn public speaking in school, university, right? They should be able to learn things like critical thinking, and they should begin to question logic and stuff like that. In university, it shouldn't be when you come out, you then have to go and do some skill building thing to add to what you have currently. So so I think just being able to do that, think beyond just what you see. Don't take things for face value. I think those are the kind of skills that we need to begin to build. So reading is key. Sometimes it gets boring, but forcing yourself to even read trains your mind. It's like an athlete, it's like Usain Bolt, for example, who would say that he runs his best races and toughest races in his training. And when he comes out to run at the Olympics, it's fun because 100 meters is a joke to him because he's done, 10,000 meters training and vomiting everywhere. Because, reading also is like that. It builds your mind such that your brain gets sharp enough so that you begin to even say things that you don't know that you even knew, because you've read about them and your brain has stored that information in there. So reading is very key. I know that it's not cool. It doesn't look cool these days, but it's actually really key. It's a cool way to sort of like build your mind and sharpen your mind as well.
I digress a little, but
Please.
still along the same line somewhat. How did we fall so low to the point that, from my experience these days, I'm just talking about critical thinking, information processing in your head and your mind. How did we fall to the point that, and I find that a lot of young persons don't even understand, for example, something as basic as when you receive a phone call and you answer it, you are supposed to speak first and say something like, hello, to let the caller know that the call has been answered and you are ready to speak.
To say something, yeah.
And many times they answer a call and they just stay silent. And the other day, one person was telling me that, the caller has to speak first. And I thought I was going to have a brain aneurysm. What happened?
Etiquette. So there's some things that you don't just learn in schools as well. I think there's some things that are taught in the home. There are things like etiquette that I learned from the dining table. My mom's like, don't sit down like that way. Sit down this way. Use this for this. I think just we sort of relegated the role of teaching as a community to just schools, I think. And because our school content now is quite limited, everything just became quite construed, right? Where if you don't learn it in school, you've not learned it anywhere else. Or maybe in church, you've not learned it anywhere else, right? So that communal role of raising, where they say, oh, it's not the parent that raises the child, but even the community comes in. I think that communal role, because of we built our fences in our homes, we've all become sort of like blocked from each other. And so, people just learn only what they learn in school, and that's it. Or maybe what they pick up from their peers, and that's it. So I think just basic etiquette, that's dignity, respect, morality, all of those things that were really high end in Nigerian society. I think we're sort of losing that, and I think that's where we need to go back to. If we go back to those kind of things, I think you have more well-rounded young people who are not just smart, in reciting definitions and stuff, but also have moral value. They can respect people. They understand etiquette, like you mentioned now, and stuff like that. Yeah,
You've been very busy at Policy Shapers.
We have actually, yeah.
And all over the world,
Yeah.
and even in the Nigerian space as well,
Yeah.
Affecting policies, changing policies, formulating policies. What are some of the things you've been up to lately?
Yeah, so there are quite a number of things we've been doing. I'll just talk about three of them. So one of them that came out of the policy hackathons that I mentioned earlier was that, so from the last hackathon we had, young people had, because when the new president came in, he mentioned giving student loans, right? He says, we give loans to young people to help them through education because things are difficult. And so from the hackathon, university students, because these are the people who benefit from the loan, right? So it's best that you have them as key people talking about these loans. So we had university students question many parts of the bill that was brought out for that loan, and question like how selection will happen, payment structure plans and stuff like that. And we had that presented. So we worked with them, all of the teams who came up with those ideas, formed the team. We were in Abuja engaging with the House Committee on the Student Loans, but also the chairman of the House Committee on Youth and Education as well. We engaged on these issues and had the ideas mainstreamed into this. Thing. I said this in 3 sentences, but it was very tough, right? First of all, getting them together, putting everything together, getting the resources to take them to Abuja, have those presented to the National Assembly. They had a couple of public hearings that we attended as well, and worked with other advocacy organizations as well to advocate for these particular issues. So some of these things were added to the loan program, which has now rolled out in a couple of institutions. We're hoping that it will roll out a lot more across the country. There's also the issue of the English language tests, because you notice that the advocacy programs we work on are based on what young people care most about. And one of the issues young people have been speaking about, I don't think young people, I think just people generally have been talking about is the language test, which is as we know, a legacy of colonization, right? Where we're colonized by the British. We speak English. This is happening in English, even though we have our own ethnic languages. And bureaucracy, public institutions, everything is run in English, right? And we go to school in English and write English in exams. But people who try to go abroad, whether it's for study opportunities or work opportunities, have to then prove that they can speak English. And they have to prove that every 2 years, for a very exorbitant rate. And we just thought that was a ridiculous thing that had gone on. And I think it was in 2020 when I tried to apply for a business program. I have many interests, right? So one of my interests at the time was to do a business program. And I applied for the business program, and they asked me for like my CV and stuff. I sent them like all things I'd done, programs and everything. And they say, yeah, we see that you've worked here, done here, done there, but you still have to prove that you can speak English. Meanwhile, we were having the conversation via email in English language, and I think that was the turning point for us, for the campaign. And yeah, it just got me really angry, and then we began that campaign. So when Policy Shapers was then founded in 2020, August 2020, it became like the house for that campaign. And so because of that campaign for the past 4 years, we've had now 37 universities around the world, including Ivy League universities like Cornell University and Calvin University across Canada, the UK, US, who have changed that policy. And now Anglo-Africans, English-speaking Africans across Africa, from Nigeria, Zambia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Uganda, etc., South Africa, everyone, can now apply to those universities without having to write an English test. For us, it's victory, but that's not the end for us. We want, so the UK has something called the Majority English-Speaking Country List, which is a policy document of countries that the UK, England, basically the owners of the English language, believe are countries who can speak the English language. You have all of the countries in the Caribbean there, like Jamaica, Bahamas, and Barbados, who are not so different from us, right? And you have like the Australia and the Canada and the US and UK, etc. But you don't have any African country there on that list. And most institutions around the world, even though we've won in 37 now, there are hundreds more, right, around the world, who take that policy document, the MESC list, as the list of countries who are officially English-speaking countries. So what we're trying to do now is to influence that policy to ensure that if that policy gets changed, we don't have to be engaging individual universities as we currently do to change their policy around this. And we've worked with a network of young people across the diaspora, young people everywhere around the world. We've had young Africans, over 82,000 young people, join us on this particular campaign. And so it's been a lot of work coordinating all of that together. Having engagements, we had the former vice president join us as well at some point during the campaign. We had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well join us. And I think one of the reasons why we've not changed that policy currently is because, especially from a Nigerian perspective, is because we've not had a census in 18 years. And the UK had asked for information, census information that shows that at least half of our population speaks English, or half of our population is educated, since we say English is a medium of instruction in our universities. And we got stuck there. public policy, right? Again, so it means that we then have to advocate for census to be done, and I mean, normally, even without having to change English policy, it makes no sense why we've not had a census in 18 years, because what data are we using to project for hunger, for poverty, for all the things that we basically say? It's basically what the UN and World Bank tell us based on statistical projections from the 2006 census. So so those are some of the things we don't know. We also worked
So before
on
you go,
JAM.
before you go to the next one,
Yes, please.
on behalf of young people everywhere in Nigeria, I'd like to say thank you to you and your team at
Thank
Policy
you.
Shapers for the brilliant work.
Thank you.
Especially as it affects this test of English language
English
proficiency
language,
or
yes,
something like
yes,
that. It's
yes.
what it's called.
Yes, English
and
language
and that
proficiency.
totally beats me as well, really. I mean, you're literally having a conversation with a person in
In
English,
English, yes,
and
and
they
they say
ask
you
you
have
to
to
prove you can
prove
speak
that you can
English.
speak English, yes.
It's mind blowing.
It makes
So
no
thank you
sense.
again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot
Please,
for acknowledging that. Yes,
go ahead.
it's been very fulfilling just seeing how much impact that has been made so far. Yeah. So also we couldn't be interested in changing things internationally alone and not think of our local our local context. And one of the things that people have spoken about in our local context lately had been JAM. So JAM had become a very big, institution. It's basically become like a revenue generation institution because JAM's budget every year is in the billions. I mean, there was a news story a couple of days ago where talked about how much JAM spent on, I think it was
Feeding
refreshment,
and
and
transportation
yeah,
and
it went into the billions, right?
Yeah.
So it's becoming very huge, and that's because so the results is valid for 1 year, and every year the cost of the test continues to increase. And so if you have a poor country that's trying to test for matriculation examinations, right, for people to get into university, why is it every year, and why is it valid? Why is it valid for a year, and why is the cost of the test always rising? And how is that revenue being plowed back, not just to JAMB and ministry, but also to the universities to ensure that when they actually get into universities, they have the tools they need to actually learn. So JAMB on their own actually set up a consultation around this, which was surprising to us. Which is why I tell people not to be very pessimistic alone, because there are also very bright sparks that come up in this particular sector. In public policy, sometimes you're surprised. You're like, oh, really? You actually want us to go and check you out and ask you questions? So they set up a conversation around this particular issue, the UTME, and they were asking questions around, the testing formats, and then now CBT, how the testing validity period, if they were to extend this period, what would that look like? Wouldn't that have too many people trying to get to universities and stuff like that? Knowing that, again, we have very few universities in Nigeria. I mean, that's one thing I always keep saying. And when I say this, I'm actually not saying that we should build more universities. I'm just giving us context to it. Because so in the US, for 350 million people, you have about 2,000 public tertiary institutions. That's like colleges, polytechnics, universities, all put together. But in Nigeria, again, we don't know our census, but let's say it's roughly 200 million people, we have about 171 institutions. So you can see the huge disparity between what's there in the US, and that's why you don't have many people waiting and rewriting exams, tertiary matriculation exams, because there are many options for people to get into school. So that's one of the issues that we also raised in that open letter that we wrote to JAM as part of the process. And we hope that it gets. I mean, this is still in the House, the floor of the National Assembly. It's been moved on to the Education Committee, and we hope that we do get progress. In doing this, we did get JAM bites. We had focus group discussion with JAM bites, people who write the exam and people who had written the exam before, to actually put in their thoughts and opinions to this. And they felt very fulfilled. They were surprised. They were like, oh, really? So this idea I have can actually go to the government? I'm like, yeah. And it was very fulfilling for many of them when we had those focus group discussions to be able to share their ideas around ways to make the JAM and the UTME examination process better.
It's good to be able to influence policy the way policy shapers is doing on a global stage, on an international stage, or even at national level. But sometimes also influencing policy at your local community level goes a long way.
It does, yes.
And usually sometimes even changing policy at global or international level starts from a local movement.
Grassroots, yes.
So how can young people get involved at local community level in determining, shaping, and changing policy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I agree that you just can't think global and national alone. It actually does start from the grassroots. And I think it starts from interest. And I want to answer the question in two ways. I think, on one hand, government, governments at the local level, whether it's local government chairpersons, smaller institutions, organizations, etc., can create a space for young people to be able to do this a lot more efficiently. I was speaking to you earlier about the fact that many organizations now, what is trending is that many organizations now internationally are setting up youth advisory boards or youth advisory committees where there's the board for the organization, but they also have a parallel youth advisory board which gives recommendations, especially if it's an organization that deals with young people. So I was representing West Africa on the British Council's UK Africa Youth Advisory Board for 2 years. And that was a space where I brought up things like IELTS, right? I brought up issues like IELTS, English language testing for Africans and stuff like that. And those were issues that made it up to the program board level of British Council. So, for example, Shell, can have a youth advisory board made up of young people from very different communities where they work. And these young people can then be the voice for what are the thoughts of youth in my community. This is how I think Shell can support young people in this particular light. Because working alone with only like traditional rulers and stuff, just people at the leadership level sometimes is very, very limiting. So I think organizations, even governments, why does the River State government, for example, doesn't have a youth advisory committee? Because the in the youth policy, national youth policy, there's a provision for a youth advisory committee in every Ministry of Youth that should not just advise the Ministry of Youth, but also should advise the state governments. So why don't we have that? I mean, we used to have youth parliaments and stuff like that, but I don't think they're very functional anymore. So I think just ensuring that there's creating those spaces for young people to be able to get into, to make their thoughts known. But I think, again, I come back to the issue of interest. How many young people even know their local government chairperson's name? Or even know what are the issues in my own community that we can rally around. It could even be your own streets. It doesn't even need to be very big as your local government. It could even be your own streets. Who is the ward councillor for my own area? And if I'm having consistent light issues, should I only rant about it on Twitter, or can I actually write and try to engage the ward councillor and say, our street has not been fixed for such a number of years. What can we do about it? So I think bringing it down to that level, that grassroots community level, is even the best way to start before you start thinking of influencing policy at the local and national level, at the international and national level. Start even thinking from how do we influence it from the small. What can I do from the small problems that I see around me in my own community? There's so much. There was a time I was living somewhere at Georgia, and there was so much trash just being thrown close to our streets for no reason. Like, I'll be like, when did this place become a waste receptacle? So we started to engage the estate chair. They have this community, estate committees, right? Where they talk about lights and stuff like that. And I'm like, where's something about this trash thing? How can we influence things around this? And then that's how the issue got up to the ward councillor and then to local government chairperson. And then we were talking about it for a while. And eventually they now moved the thing from our own side to somewhere at the main junction, which is still not cool, actually. Which I still think we can do something better about. But eventually, I moved away from there. But I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be something, it can be even something that's small. It can be waste, it can be bad road, it can be, something really, really small. And I think if we engage it from a place of optimism and just saying, let's see how this goes, much more than they will not even listen to me, which is what we usually do. They won't listen to me, it's a waste of my time. Even just doing something about it first, I think is the best way to even, engage this particular process. And so, yeah, I actually do believe that there are two answers. Organizations and governments need to create a space, but also young people need to be able to have the interest to get into there and engage that space that's been created for them.
And on that engagement level, we wrap up this episode of the podcast Canvas the Niger-Delta Roundtable. We have discussed, can young minds grasp public policy? If you've watched this entire episode, I think the answer is a consensus, yes. And my guest has been Ebenezer Wikina, founder, Policy Shapers.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much
having this
me.
conversation with you, Ebenezer. I had no doubt it was going to be this remarkable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Stay.
Remember, the podcast is brought to you by SPDC. I'm Adid Dai Bishaki. Join us next time for another episode. Follow our various social media accounts across the various social media platforms and keep engaging in policy. It's lit, no cap. Bye.